So we're going to get started. The lecture portion today is actually pretty short, and then we'll do a lot more time in the demo section. We're going to talk about vector versus raster graphics. And I think this is kind of an important topic for us to talk about now. We are moving today from Adobe InDesign into Adobe Illustrator. Both InDesign and Illustrator are technically vector graphics programs. Photoshop, on the other hand, is a raster graphics program. And one of the questions that I get right now, especially when we move into Illustrator, is, wait a minute, why don't I just do this stuff in Photoshop? And there's a distinct answer. There's a reason that one program is better than another for a specific task. So today is really about understanding what that difference is and why you invest your time to learn Illustrator when you also invest your time to learn Photoshop. So raster graphics, and when I say raster graphics, essentially what I mean by a raster graphic is an image. And what an image is, fundamentally, is it's a bunch of individual colored squares that are all crammed next to each other. And those little colored squares are so small that we don't see them. We see all the colors blend together in a nice, smooth manner. Therefore, we see the image, not the individual little colored squares. So that's what a raster graphic is. It's made up of individual little colored squares. There are some distinct advantages to a raster graphic. We can do pixel by pixel color correction. Right? Each individual little square can be changed. It means that we have a really nice, smooth gradient in color. We can have really nuanced transitions. It's perfect for a photograph. It's easier to edit wherever complex color is involved. So if we're editing photographs, for example, we want to make a curves adjustment or a levels adjustment, those work really nicely in a raster graphic format. It's also easier to apply a fancy effect to the image because we're just dealing with those individual pixels. There are, of course, disadvantages to a raster graphic. At some point when you zoom in on a raster graphic, you're going to see those little squares. You can't zoom in infinitely. At some point, it pixelates. The raster file sizes also tend to be very large because in a raster file, we have this square is this color. The square next to it is this color. The square next to it is this color. The square next to it is this color. Every single square has a color identified to it. And if you imagine millions of little squares put together to make a pixel, to make an image, all that information makes the file big. So the file sizes are always a little bit larger, and they could take a little bit more processing power, a little more computer memory to work with. You guys are more likely to run into memory and scratch disk problems in Photoshop than you ever are when you're working in Illustrator, for example. It's just the nature of working with that kind of an image. A vector graphic, on the other hand, so that all was raster graphic. A vector graphic is essentially a mathematical definition of a curve, a line, etc. So every shape that you're creating is defined mathematically. So a good example for this would be a square. Okay, we can define a square using 2 points. 1 point, second point, make a square between them. That's all it takes from a mathematical definition. That is inherently really, really small in file size. It's a very small amount of information, and the computer can fill in from there. So we've got 2 points, make a square out of those 2 points, fill it with red. No problem. So there are, of course, advantages. The big one is that images can scale without any distortion. You can continue to make them larger and larger and larger and larger, and it doesn't make any difference because they're mathematically defined. They're always going to have a sharp edge. So a good example would be I design a logo, and it's designed to fit on a business card. And I make that a vector graphic, and I like it. And then my company becomes successful, and I decide I want to go put that on a giant, one of those freeway bulletin board things, those massive, right? I want to make that logo, 6 feet across. If I did it as a vector graphic, I can blow it up to 6 feet across, and it's going to be just as sharp on the edges. It's never going to be pixelated. There's a big advantage to that. Because of how all of those curves are mathematically defined, the file sizes are inherently very, very small. They're also much easier on the computer to process and to work with because those file sizes are small. Disadvantages, though. Vector images are not good for photographs because of the high complexity colors that are involved in a photograph. I think this is probably the best illustration to make the point. So if we look over on the right side here, we have two images. We have this one and we have this one. This one here is the raster image. Looks like a traditional photograph. This one down here is the vector image. And if we look carefully, like in the cheek area, you see how we see those little colored regions? We don't have the nuanced color that's available in a photograph. So it's not, vector graphic is not good for that high complexity, highly nuanced photographic image. The other disadvantage is they're not as universal of files as, say, a JPEG. Right? A JPEG is pretty much you can open it anywhere using any computer and any device, no matter what. If you have a vector file, an AI, an EPS file, number one, you don't see them as often. But you generally need some kind of a specialty program to open it. You need Adobe Illustrator, or you need some other vector-based program to open it. It's not going to be something that you're just going to, oh, let me pull it up on my phone, inherently. So it's a little bit more complicated to work with. So when to use your raster versus your vector? So the raster images belong in things like photographs, high dynamic range images, HDRI background images for rendering. All of that's going to occur on the raster side. The vector side is going to be things like line drawings, which would include architectural drawings. It would also include 3D modeling. We're working in Rhino. That's a vector-based program as well. It would be things like logos. You want to be able to use them really small. You want to be able to use them really big. Type, fonts, great example. When you go into your computer and you type something in 10 point, the font looks normal. When you select that font and you blow it up to 200 point, the font still looks good, correct? Doesn't have pixelated edges. That's because it is a vector graphic. It's mathematically defined. Another example here just to illustrate file sizes a little bit. This is that logo right here at the top. And if we look at this, we have a small resolution, 250 by 78. The vector size is still it's small. The raster size is about double, but it's still relatively small. Right? We don't really care at that point. But if we blow it up to a much larger file size, notice that the vector size is exactly the same as it was when it was small. Mathematically defined. We can blow it up as large as we want. Doesn't change anything. But look at the major increase in the raster file size. Significant increase. And that's not even a particularly large resolution. And we suddenly went to a 2 megabyte file. Here's the next illustration. This is about blowing things up. We have the logo in its vector format. If we blow it up to 1600%, you can see that the tip of the wing right here maintains its nice sharp shape. If we take the same image here and we rasterize it, so we make it a raster image, and then we blow it up to 1600%, look at how pixelated that becomes. So that's what I'm talking about being able to blow a vector file up and not lose the resolution. Computer programs, they fall into two categories. Photoshop, V-Ray, image-based programs are going to be on the raster side of things. Vector side of things is going to be Illustrator, InDesign, AutoCAD, SketchUp, Vectorworks, Revit, Rhino. Those are all going to be vector-based programs. So we're going to continue right along with your exercise 113, which is really about making your own font. The truth is that the translation of what this is it's a day of practice with the pen tool in Illustrator. That's really what it should say on here. But I try to hide that in making your own font because it's a little more exciting to make your own font than to just practice the pen tool all day. One other thing that I will point out, you got your handout for assignment 104 today, which is the Charlie Harper drawing. You guys are doing this. It's due on Wednesday the 25th. That means you're going to be posting it. This handout probably says I want a print of it, but I just told you we're stopping all printing, so you don't have to worry about that part. Even if the handout says it, you don't have to do the print. This next lecture though it may be online, I go through this. We talk about Charlie Harper in a lot more detail. So I'm giving it to you now because this is the last chance I have to give you paper. So here's your paper, and it might be the last paper you get. Okay? So that's there. You can read it, but like I said, next lecture we'll go over it in a little bit more detail. Okay, so in terms of exercise 113, we're going to be working in Adobe Illustrator. I've already opened up Illustrator here, so I've logged into Illustrator and what have you. But in order to do this, instead of making you just create this from scratch, I actually have a template file that you can download. So I'm going to encourage you to do that. It's on the course website here. And if we go into today's exercise, and we scroll down here a little bit, where is it? At the very bottom, download Illustrator template for exercise 113. We'll want to go ahead and click on that. And then you can go ahead and open that template. And we'll open it using Illustrator. Like that. So you download it and then you'll open it. This file is based on a website called Calligrapher. Actually, I should have double checked. I don't know if I did. Go to today's and then scroll to the very bottom. It's the last link below the PDF. So this is based on a website called Calligrapher. It's good luck spelling it because they've removed some of the vowels. But anyway, it's there. And this website will allow you to create your own font through their online system. You essentially upload it, and then they make a font out of it and give it back to you. You're limited in terms of the number of characters that you can do for free. You can do like the letters and the numbers. But if you wanted to actually go further, you could pay to have a full font based on your handwriting or whatever. We're using it just as kind of a carrot to practice your pen tool all day today. So if you get done, you can create it into a font, though that's not actually required. Really, today is about the pen tool and learning the pen tool. So first thing I want to do, because this is our first day in Adobe Illustrator, I want to kind of point out what's going on in Adobe Illustrator and what's available to us, etc. So it looks almost identical to Adobe InDesign. Very, very similar. In fact, Illustrator was kind of a precursor to InDesign. You used to do layout work in Illustrator. Now Illustrator is just about drawing, and InDesign is where you're going to do the layouts. You can also take your Illustrator file natively, the AI file, the Adobe Illustrator file, and drop it straight into an InDesign file. So you don't have to do any conversions. You don't have to make a PDF or a JPEG out of it. You can just take it and drop it straight in. So that's something that's important for you guys to know long term. So we have our traditional file menu structure up at the top. Looks very similar to InDesign's. Our toolbar runs down the left side of the page. It also looks very similar. The one thing that's notably absent is the frame tool. So in Illustrator, you're not going to be able to place an image inside of a frame. That part is taken out. Technically, you can create something called a clipping mask and do essentially the same thing, but it's much less common to do it here. So we're going to do it in InDesign rather than Illustrator. So you'll see a distinct lack of the frame tool here. There are some other tools that will be interesting, one of which is called the width tool. We'll explore that a little bit today. And so there's some other options. We will spend a lot of time today with the pen tool. It's the third tool down right there. And it looks kind of like an old-fashioned ink pen is what it's looking like. On our right side over here, we have by default showing, as long as we're in the Essentials workspace, which we are, we have our basic properties showing. When we click on the pen tool, our basic properties are going to change based on the contextual pen tool. And so you'll see those available. Next to that, we have a window for layers. And inside of that window for layers, we have some layers that I've already set up in this template file for you. I have two different pages available, page 1 and page 2. I have a layer for guides, and I have a layer for font page 1 and font page 2. We're going to be actually drawing on font page 1 and font page 2 in a little bit. At this point, I want you to go ahead and turn off the page 2, which is going to show us page 1 and let us start with the capital letters. I'm going to skip over the numbers for right now, and I'm going to start with the capital letters because it's a good place to start with our letters. So I've turned off page 2, and I've made sure that my font page 1 is highlighted in kind of that light blue color. That's then the active layer, so when I start to draw, it's going to show up on that layer. One mistake people make is they end up with a layer that is off as their active layer, and when they go to try to draw, you get a little null sign next to your cursor, and you're like, wait a minute, I can't draw. The reason that you can't draw is because you're not on an active layer. So I'm now on that active font page 1 layer. I'll switch back to the properties window, and now I see the pen tool at the end of my cursor. Okay? So I've given you guys a little bit of, I'm going to zoom in, Control plus zooms in. I've given you guys a little bit of a guide that's set up here. I have a descender, I have a baseline, I have an X height, and I have a cap height. If you don't like my X height, you can change it. So don't feel like you're stuck with this, but this might give you a good place to kind of start. And so those guides are there for your enjoyment. So when it comes to using the pen tool, a lot of the pen tool is about practice. And that's why we're doing the whole alphabet today, both the upper and lowercase letters, and ultimately getting to the numbers, because I want you to have this practice. The more comfortable you are with the pen tool, the more universally you'll be able to work in all the programs. The pen tool exists in InDesign, it exists in Illustrator, and lo and behold, it actually exists in Photoshop too. We haven't touched on it in Photoshop much, but it does exist there. So it's kind of a universal tool across all of the Adobe suite, and so if you get comfortable with it, you'll be able to use it in all the programs. So I'm going to start with the letter A. It's a nice simple letter to work with, and essentially what it is it's a bunch of straight lines. So I could start at my baseline right here, and I could draw a line going up. That was a single click. I can come up to the center, we'll call it right about there, and then I can come back down with my line to this point. Now I have to kind of guess at where the symmetrical point would be. We'll put it right about there. And when I'm done, I will click on this black arrow to finish what I drew. Now it doesn't look quite even to me, so I may want to go back in and modify this shape a bit. I'll do that by selecting this direct selection tool, the white arrow. And when I select the white arrow, I can actually click on the control point, the anchor point right there, and I can move that point to where it feels like it belongs. And there, it's snapping to the middle of those. And so now I have the nice symmetrical A that I was looking for. I can increase the stroke over here in my properties. Right now it's at 1 point. I could bump it up to 2 or 3 point. There it's 4 points, so you could see it a little bit better. And I now have the start of the A. I need the crossbar for the A, so I'll come back to the pen tool. Now here's a tricky part. If I move my cursor over the top of the existing path and I click, it's actually going to create a control point there rather than a start of a line. Oops, I was slightly off, so it let me do it. Try it one more time, see if I can get it to... No, it's going to let me do it anyway. Sometimes you have trouble because it'll create a control point rather than create the line, in which point you might have to be close by and not quite on top of your object. So there it is. I've drawn my crossbar, and I've created that first letter. I can, of course, select it. I could move it. I can use my direct selection tool to modify the endpoints and adjust what it looks like. Right now, this shape is also, let's see if I can illustrate it a little bit better. It's being filled with white because my color fill is white. So if I were starting to draw something like an S, we'll get to the S in a second. Oops, sorry. But if I were starting to fill in an S, now it's not even showing that way. Let me think of which one. I don't know, we'll just continue on and see. Okay, so I've done the A. I'm going to move down here. I'm going to skip over the B and I'm going to go to the D next. Okay? So on the D, I'm going to use my pen tool again, and I'm going to draw the left bar of the D as just a straight line down there. I could draw from the bottom up. I could draw from the top down. It's just a matter of preference. So there it is there. Now as I start to create the D, if I do single clicks, you'll see that I'm stuck with these kind of angular options, which is really not attractive. So alternatively, what the pen tool allows us to do is it allows us to draw a straight line segment like this. I could come out a little bit as a straight line segment, but I want this part to be curved. So what I will do is I will click where where I want the center of the curve to be, and I will hold and drag to create a tangent line for that center. So I've created a tangent line now that starts that curve there. I can then finish the curve up here at the top, right about there, and then I'll come back as a little straight segment, and I've then created the shape of the D. Does that make sense so far? So it's a click, hold, drag to create the tangent line. Let me come over and do the B. So I'll do this in a very similar manner. I'll do the left bar here. We'll come over for the bottom of the B. I'm going to click, hold, and drag to create my tangent line. I'm going to come back to right here, and then I will come in. See, here's one of the scenarios that I was just talking about. I come over here and I try to make it end, and I end up creating another point there rather than actually making it end. So in this scenario, get close to your line and just end it there. Then come back with your direct select tool, the white arrow, select that control point and move it over the top of your line. I'm going to come back to the pen tool. I'm going to start at the top again. Notice that when I use the pen tool and I hover over an existing control point, I get the pen tool with a little line. That's a continuation. So I can continue from this point, making my letter. So there I am. Go to about the halfway point, click, hold, drag to create that arc, and then we'll come down and end about there. It may take a little bit of an adjustment to get that like that, and I've now created that part of the B. Remember, I've been working in Illustrator for probably 15 or more years. So I've had a lot of practice with the pen tool. So I can do a letter like this and make it look really easy. Chances are the first time you go to do a B, you're going to do something and it's going to end up being more like that, and you're going to be like, that was so not what I wanted to do, and then you come back here and, oops, and you'll do the top part, and it's going to look like that. And you're like, that really wasn't the look I was going for. Okay? If that's the case, two things. I made two mistakes. Of course, I made them on purpose while I was doing this, but I made two mistakes. Number one, I picked too many control points. So on this upper part of the B here, I did a control point here, and I did a control point there. The fewer control points you use, the better. So just in this shape, I picked just one to control that curve. As soon as I start to have more control points here, it starts to get far more complicated to create this shape. Likewise, this one here, my tangent line is off at an angle. So it's going to make this corner much sharper, and it's also going to make this round and come back down. So remember, with that direct select tool, you can always modify your placement of a control point and your tangent line. Oops. And so you can start to make those adjustments. I can pull this back a little bit like that, and you see how I'm starting to fix the errors in those curves. So what about in a scenario like this where we end up with too many control points? So I have some options here. First one, this one here, I could convert, instead of being smooth, I can convert it to an angled control point. So over here in my properties, there is the option to convert to a corner or to convert to smooth. So this first one I could convert to a corner, and I could then edit this corner and pull it back to say there. Then I could take this one, pull it up a little bit, adjust my tangent line, pull that down just a little bit, maybe a little bit further, like that. I can take this control point and pull it back to about there, and then I do need to finish off from here over like that. So you see how I'm modifying it after the fact. So you can, of course, modify something as you start to create it. I'm going to get rid of that for right now. OK, so I did the B, I did the D. I can come over and do the E. Guess what? The E is super easy because it's all straight line segments. So there's our first segment. There's our bottom segment. There's our top segment. Oh, come on. And there's our middle. You know, I could get creative. I could pull this, you know, further down or whatever, depending on the look of the font. For the F, it's almost the same as the E. So I could just take the E, copy it, paste it. There's a good example. See how this is currently being filled with white? I can convert that to being not filled by changing my fill color to transparent. And then I could move this over to make the F. And then I want to get rid of this bottom bar down here. Well, the bottom bar currently is attached to this vertical bar. So if I use my direct select, my white arrow, and I select that control point, I can come over here in my anchors and I could say cut the path at that anchor point, which then separates this line segment from that line segment. And then I can take this line segment and I can delete it. And then I've created my F out of my E. Does that make sense? So what about an object that's like a C? Did you have a question?
If there was more lines after that, would it eliminate everything?
Yeah, if I cut this and it kept going, it would eliminate everything going further along. Assuming that I split it and then delete it, essentially. We'll get to trimming. I'm about to do a trim, okay?
How did you get it to cut, give you the cut option?
So you're going to use the white arrow, the direct select. You'll select the control point where you want to do the cut. And then it'll show up over here under the anchor section. It's a little like a dotted line with a pair of scissors. OK, so what about the C? So the C, I could use my pen tool and carefully control my points. And I could say there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, and there's 4. But even with all my practice, it still looks pretty bad. So instead of doing it that way, I would suggest that you use one of your pre-made shapes. So I'm going to come over here and use the ellipse tool. And with the ellipse tool, essentially I can draw and create an ellipse to establish the bulk of the C, because it's nice and smooth that way. And then I need to come in and I need to trim off a section in there to open up that side of the C. To do that, there are currently no control points at the places where I want to break open the path. So I need to come back to my pen tool and hover over my object. Now, notice when I'm hovering over the object, you might be able to see it here a little bit better. See how the pen tool gets a little plus sign next to it? That means that it's going to add an anchor to the path. So if we zoom in here a little bit, I get that plus sign. I add an anchor right there. That's the point at which I want to end the C. Then I'd come up here to the top and I'd add an anchor point right there. So I have those 2 anchor points added. Now I have 2 options at this point. I could just select this point in the middle and press the delete key, and that would open it up. Because when you delete an anchor point, it gets rid of the 2 line segments that are attached to the anchor point. So you would have to have a point in the middle to delete. Okay, so that's one scenario. The other scenario would be to take your direct select and select this control point, cut it, select this control point, cut it, and then use the regular selection tool to select just this line segment and then delete it that way. For me personally, it's extra steps to do it that way, but if it makes more intuitive sense to do it that way, there's no harm in doing it that way. So I've now created the C. Now the C is very, very similar to the G, so let's go ahead and take the C, Control C to copy, Control V to paste, and we'll move it over. Like that. Now in the G, maybe I want to continue from this point, go up vertically, and then come back toward the center. If I want to make sure that that is perfectly horizontal, I can hold down the Shift key as I create it, and I now have the G. H is pretty self-explanatory. I think you could probably manage. Guess what? I think you can probably manage I. You could probably manage J. You could probably manage K, L, M, N. You get the idea, right? O would be the ellipse tool again. Now we get down here into the fun ones, right? So the good old S, this is probably the last one you'll do. Do all the other letters first, then come back to the S, because guess what? The S is the hardest letter to create. You could use 2 ellipses to create, say, the top of the S and then the bottom of the S. And then you could use your trim where we add an anchor point, say, there. We add an anchor point, say, there. Oops, didn't add one. And let's go to the direct select. Oh, it didn't add. That's difficult. Come on. Let's try it again. It's, good, I do have an anchor point there. And I have an anchor point there. Good. So I can now select that point, press delete, and I'll get rid of those line segments, and I can select this point, press delete, and I can get rid of those line segments. Oops, looks like I got rid of too much, but you guys get the idea, certainly. So that's one way of creating it. The other way, it's a little flat in here. The other way is to actually create it with the pen tool, which I would challenge you to do, because if you get comfortable with the pen tool, you can actually do this pretty well. Again, it's about where the control points are. So if I obviously have to single click to start, I want one control point at the top to control the top part. I want one control point, you can do it 2 ways. You could put a control point here, or you could just put one in the middle and drag a longer tangent line there to create as smooth of a curve as possible through it. And then you're going into the second curve, which adds to a little bit of a challenge there. And then we'll come back around to there and back. Oops. Sorry, that was supposed to be a click and hold. There, and then back up to there to finish. Now, it's not quite perfect, but that's where you can come in and you can adjust these tangent lines a little bit. So I'm going to pull that up just a little bit. I'm going to pull this one over. Oops. Pull that one over to elongate a little bit. The length of these tangents also affects the curvature, so you can adjust the length there. And eventually you can get to the point where you have a pretty good looking S. So that's pretty good. I'm going to raise this one up a little bit and shorten that down a little bit. Lengthen that one a little bit, like that. That really should go a little higher. And it's maybe about like that. So I've worked my way through the S. Okay? So it takes a little bit of modification no matter how much practice you have with it. When you're done with the first page of these, I did the capital letters, then you'll do the numbers. Then we'll switch layers. So we'll turn off page 1, and we'll turn off the font page 1. We'll turn on page 2, and we'll turn on the font page 2, which is the rest of the capital letters and the lowercase letters for you to work on. I'm going to go back to where I have font page 1. There we go. And I want to explore a few other options that you may be interested in. We're not going to cover brushes today, though if you feel comfortable and you want to apply some brush strokes, I'm okay with that. But the one other piece of this that I want to kind of explore today and show you is something that's called the width tool. So we've been working with the pen tool here, but if we come down here a little bit further to the width tool, it looks kind of like a slug, for lack of a better term. A slug with a line across it. And what the width tool allows you to do is it allows you to adjust the width at any point along the length of a line. So if I look at the G here, for example, I could choose to have part of this G become a little fatter. So I could move my mouse over the line, click, hold, drag, and I can increase the thickness, say at that point of the G, and then it's going to get thinner as we go through. I could also have an existing point get even thinner. Oops. There, I have to get right on the edge there, so that it tapers down to nothing. I could have this point taper down to nothing, and I could increase the width of, say, this tool like that, depending on the look that you were going for. Right? Sometimes this is particularly useful when you're working on an S, because you can choose what part of the S you want to be a little bit fatter and what part you might want to be a little bit thinner to create the shape that you're looking for. You have the ability at any point to adjust. So I could make it thick here, like that, depending on the look that you're going for. So you can really get a lot of customization out of the width tool, depending on where you do it. If you're struggling because it's adjusting certain line segments and not other line segments, it usually has to do with the placement of your control points as to which ones you're adjusting. Over in the properties, we have something called a width profile that you can apply. So right now, if I were to select an object, let's say this D here, let me go to the width tool, and of course it went away. How nice. Let me go to Window, and let's see. Maybe I actually have to have an active width. There it is. So I guess I have to create a width profile. I have to create a width first, but then I can choose from a bunch of preset width profiles that will apply over my object depending on how you set it up. So you could use one of those preset width profiles that are there. That was what I wanted to point out. Okay? So today your job is to work your way with the pen tool through all of the letters. And again, this is about practice. When you are done, you're more than welcome to play around with the width tool. The couple other things that people sometimes ask is, how do I change how the corners are applied? So right here, oops, let's look at the top of the A, if I can find it. There it is. It's at a sharp point. If I don't want it to be a sharp point, I can select that point. I can come over here. And I can change, no, that's the corners. Sorry, they moved stuff around on me. I need the full stroke panel. There it is. So in the stroke panel here, I could change what the corner looks like. So I can choose to have it rounded, or I can choose to have it beveled, where it's chopped. So I can work through, and if one of those looks better than the other, you're more than welcome to choose that as well. I'm not going to worry about the arrowheads and some of the other stuff. Oh, there's the profile. I knew it was here without having to select the width tool first. So it's under the stroke submenu. So if you click on stroke here, you can then access these submenu items.